Hello, we're playing against a Portuguese player, and we're going to open with the pawn king e4. So Malmago just responded. He's rated 1702, and he replied with the symmetrical move, playing e5. So what are we going to play? Well, maybe we'll play a center gambit. I'll play d4. I'm offering him my pawn, and I'm not going to recapture with the queen. Watch, I'll continue. I'll play c3. I'm offering him another pawn, and he takes it. So I could recapture with the knight, but this time I'm going to play bishop to c4. I'm still not going to recapture, with the idea that if he takes my b2 pawn, I'll recapture with the bishop, and I'll have a powerful pair of bishops aiming toward his king side. Usually black takes, but here he doesn't. He plays bishop to c5, declining my offer. But the bishop on c5 is unprotected. And when you have the bishop on c4 attacking the f7 pawn, you should always look for sacrifices on that pawn. I'm going to consider bishop takes f7 check. I could also be interested in queen d5. But queen d5, which attacks his bishop on the f7 pawn, the opponent could play queen e7 and defend both. I'm going to look at bishop takes, king takes. And after that, I can continue either with queen d5 or queen h5 to attack his king and his bishop. So in my opinion, that's what needs to be done. I sacrifice my bishop because I know I'm going to get it back, but under good conditions, since I will have forced his king to lose castling rights. Now I have two possible checks to win back his bishop, either with d5 or with h5. I think I'm going to play h5 to try to provoke the g6 push. And after that, I'll take the bishop on c5. Why do I want to provoke the push of the g6 pawn? Because once I've taken his dark squared bishop, I'll be the only one controlling the dark squares. And with the dark squared bishop, you see. And so, by making him play g6, it will open up the long dark diagonal for me. So I'm going to take the dark squared bishop. I'll be the only one with the dark squared bishop. So I want him to play g6 to weaken the dark squares. So should I take the bishop right away, or should I give a check on d5 first? I don't really know which is better, actually. Should I take the bishop immediately or give a check? I'm going to give him a check. The opening was the center gambit, or the Danish Gambit. I'm not completely certain of the correct or official name. I'll specify it in the title or in the comments of the game. In this type of opening with sacrifices, the idea was to develop quickly and create tactical threats. This is typical of the Romantic era in chess. So here my opponent is thinking a lot. I'll speed up this sequence in editing to take you straight to his move. There, he just played king to g7. All right, well now I recover. And you see the idea is that my dark squared bishop can have a strong presence on the long dark diagonal. So my opponent plays d6, attacking my queen. All right, I'll take his pawn while giving check. If he plays queen to f6 to counter me, I could go queen to c7, but he played knight to f6, which seems more natural because it will allow the rook to join the fight, probably on e8. The knight attacks my pawn, but since it's in a pin, I have nothing to fear. All right, now I need to think a bit. Where do we stand in terms of imbalances? We have a position with bishop of opposite colors. A dark squared bishop against a light squared bishop. That leads to a very sharp game. While in endgames this can often result in a lot of draws because each side tries to block the color the other can't break through, in the middle game it leads to a lot of attacks. It's very sharp because you can attack on a color that the other side will have trouble defending. When considering the pawn structure currently on the board, I have 6 pawns against 6, but you can see that he has very few pawns actually defending his king. And on top of that, the champion who will block the squares. So in this position, the black king doesn't really have any shelter. That's the advantage for white in this position. So with opposite colored bishop, I have to fight on the dark squares, and against a king with poor shelter. I didn't mention it earlier, but we're playing a 10-minute game with a 2-second increment. So we have 10 minutes for the whole game and 2 seconds added for each move played. It's a small time increment. So here I am talking and talking, but now I need to find the right move. No. We could consider bishop to g5 to double up the attacks on the knight and pin it. But my opponent could also play rook to f8 to defend well, or even moves like knight to d7, which would protect the knight. I'm not sure if it's worth it right now. We could also look at moves like queen e3 to infiltrate on h6, but the queen alone would be a bit isolated. What else can we look at? Of course, I have some natural developing moves I can develop with knight f3. I'm also considering the h4 push with the idea of playing h5. The knight won't be able to take since it's in a pin. And the idea is to open the h-file to benefit my rook and to the detriment of his king. So that's something I'm interested in. The move h4 to play h5 afterwards. I think that's what I'm going to play, because you see, if I no longer have my h-pawn, I'll have moves like bishop h6 check, with the rook defending my bishop. I need to exploit the weakness of the h6 square, the diagonal, and everything on the dark squares around the king. So I play h4. See, here I'm limiting myself to looking for developing moves. I wouldn't have found the move h4. Here I'm really organizing my thinking around the insecurity of the black king and the need to fight on the dark squares. And look, my opponent plays h6. So now, what is he trying to tell me? He's telling me that if I push h5, he would probably counter push with g5. With h5, you see, if he takes with the pawn, I could recapture with the rook. Knight takes would still not be possible because of the pin. So if I play h5 and he counter pushes with g5, in the end, he manages to solidify his position on the dark squares with h6 defending g5. All right, so I need to come up with a new idea. For now, I don't have any other ideas. Maybe I'll just develop with knight e2, so that I can maybe later jump to squares. Like f4, g3, d4, I would have several options. Of course, I could play knight to f3, but I feel like my knight is more limited if I go to f3. And above all, since I have to fight for the dark squares, he'll have to fight for the light squares. Maybe at some point there will be moves like rook to e8 that will come to attack. And I want to keep the f3 square free so that the f2 pawn can come to f3 and solidify the e4 pawn. Here I play knight to f3. I would block this advance of pawns. So instead I'm going to play knight e2 here. Knight e2. Yes, it's an interesting position because there's a lot of imbalance. As we said, opposite colored bishops. Pawn structure with different majorities. 4 pawns for black on the queen side against 2, but we have 4 pawns for white on the king side against 2. Then we have kings that don't have shelter. For me, the black king doesn't have shelter. The white king is also in a delicate situation. So rook e8 is played. So now he's threatening rook e4. I can defend with moves like knight d2. But I think I'll play f3 so as not to block this diagonal for now. I'll play f3. I'm consolidating. So if my opponent might play d5, on which I take, the queen recaptures, and then look, the knight would only be defended by the king, so I could maybe do some bishop's checks, king takes, and then take his knight. But anyway, that's not what happened. My opponent just played knight c6. So what is threatened with l6? I don't think he's threatening anything directly, except that he's developing, of course, and that could be beneficial for him later on. But you see, the tactical idea at some point is that if his queen no longer protects the knight, there could be this idea of playing bishop takes to deflect the king and then take the knight. And the black king would have less and less protection. He would actually have no more pawn cover. So here, still with the idea of starting a fight on the dark squares, I'm considering bishop g5. I hadn't necessarily thought of this idea, but with the idea that if pawn takes, I recapture with the pawn, attacking the knight which remains pinned. And I open up the file. The bishop g5 is actually interesting. Since I'm attacking his knight twice, it's true that he doesn't have to react, because for now he's defending it twice. And if I play bishop g5, maybe he can even play a move like knight e5, and my queen no longer attacks. So in the end, bishop g5 is interesting, but he's not obliged to take me. I'd like him to take me, but he doesn't have to, and that's the downside. So I have moves like queen d2 or queen e3 also to go attack h6. He can come back to h8 to defend. He could even retreat the knight to g8. Maybe I need to save that for a bit later. Otherwise, I have g4 with the idea of playing g5. So pawn takes, and attack the knight that's pinned. I think it's g4 that needs to be played. All right, g4. So he might move out of the pin. If he moves out of the pin, he still has to keep protecting h6. So maybe with king to h7. If king h7, I could play bishop g5, attack his knight twice. And after pawn takes, the rook attacks his king, and the pawn attacks his knight. That's not bad either. Or after king h7, I could also consider queen to d2 and attack h6. He might come back to g8 to protect the knight on g8. So he plays the move queen to e7, so I think he didn't really consider the move bishop to g5 in this position. g5, the knight is attacked, he actually loses a piece. Unless I'm the one who missed something. I'll play g5, let's see. Well, I have just over a minute left and a handful of seconds. So I need to play a bit faster. So he takes, I take back, and now actually the knight is pinned. He loses the piece. It's not just about losing the piece. It's also about opening the h-file. For example, if I do pawn takes, queen takes, his queen is protected by the king, but I can play rook h7 to really put the pressure on him, to separate the king from the protection of the queen. There you go, he resigns. All right, let's analyze all of this. So let's analyze this game, and especially this opening. I start with e4, king's pawn opening, e5 and d4. So I immediately attack his center. He takes, which is normal. Here, it's possible to recapture with the queen, but I played c3, which is actually called the Danish Gambit or the Northern Gambit. At first, I mentioned the center gambit, but the center gambit is if white plays bishop to c4 here. So after c3, it's the Danish Gambit or the Northern Gambit. Black takes on c3, and it's still possible to recapture with the knight, but I played bishop to c4. Usually in this position, black takes on b2, and I recapture with the bishop. We're down 2 pawns as white, but we have a powerful pair of bishops aiming toward the king's side and a destabilizing central pawn. For example, if black plays king to f6, we'll push the pawn to f5. This can put black in trouble if they don't know the defensive lines. But in the game, after the move bishop to c4, he didn't want to take on b2. He didn't want to take that second pawn. He developed with bishop to c5, and this is where we're going to make a thematic sacrifice on f7. That's often why we put the bishop on c4. It's to put pressure on f7, the least well-defended pawn in the opening. And you always have to keep the sacrifice on that pawn in mind. So since the bishop on c5 isn't protected, I played bishop for f7 check to force the king out here. And then make a fork between the king, which will be on f7, and the bishop. So I specified that if I had played, for example, queen d5, attacking the bishop, and the pawn, my opponent could play queen e7 to defend both. So it's really bishop for f7 that you have to do. King takes, and here there are two possible checks to make the fork. Queen d5 to attack the king and the bishop, and queen h5 to attack the king and the bishop like this. And I preferred queen h5. So I checked, and actually the most commonly played move is queen d5, but I really prefer queen h5 to provoke the g6 push, because when I take the dark square bishop, I'll be the only one with a dark square bishop. So I'm happy for the g7 pawn to move to g6, since that will open up the dark diagonals for the benefit of my dark square bishop. So here I could have taken the bishop immediately, but I made a stop at d5. He comes onto the dark square, so all the better. That will give me a possible check later on. d6, queen takes c3 check, and knight f6. And in this position, in the end, I haven't gained anything. We have the same number of pieces and the same number of pawns, but there are imbalances. A dark square bishop versus a light square bishop, and a majority of 4 against 2 on the king side, against 4 for him, against 2 on the queen side. But as a result, I have assets to attack his king. The dark square bishop, while the shelter is broken on the dark squares, and the lack of pawn cover for his king. So I played h4 to try to threaten h5, and my opponent played h6. The most accurate would certainly have been rook to e8 to attack the e4 pawn. Then I can try to defend it or continue my attack with h5, by the way. On rook to e4 check, I escape to f1. If my opponent plays b6 to bring the bishop to h6, be careful. That's still very dangerous. That way, after bishop h6 check, we have the g1 cage. And we have this position. There you go. It's a rather unusual position for an opening, since we're not even at the 15th move of the game. There's already quite a bit of attacking going on, but I think it's a promising attack for white. After all, it's true that the white king hasn't castled, but the rook is on the g-file. It's well placed to support the attack. So my opponent played h6. I played knight to e2. Rook to e8, f3 to solidify, knight to c6. And here I'd mentioned moves like queen to d2 or queen to e3 to try to attack on h6. The computer actually thinks that's the best move, but I preferred to play g4 to threaten the g5 push. In case of capture, attacking the knight which is pinned. And here, my opponent didn't respond to the threat since he played queen to e7. Actually, the best move would have been castling to get out of the line of fire. And I mentioned in the video that I was interested in the move bishop to g5, to attack the knight twice, which is pinned along this diagonal. And in case of capture, I recapture opening the g-file, check to the king, and attacking the knight. You see, that's what I would have liked to do. For example, if the king moves to g7, I take. And if the queen takes, obviously everything is brought back. To divert the king from the protection of the queen and then take the queen. That's how I would have tried to continue with bishop g5. The computer also showed that there was another move I hadn't thought of, this king h7. It's the move bishop h6 also, bishop takes h6. Because if the king takes, we have the fork on g5. But so after g4, my opponent didn't get out of the pin. He left the king on the diagonal, he played queen e7. So g5, take, and there he resigned, because he's actually going to lose his knight. It's inevitable. So of course, it's not checkmate yet, so he could have continued the game. But losing this knight as well, with a king that's not well protected, doesn't really give him any chance to save himself. If he's playing against an inexperienced player, he might be able to turn things around. But against a more experienced player, he really has no chance of getting out of it. It's a material loss that's too significant and isn't really compensated for by any other factors in the position. I hope you enjoyed this game, and we'll meet again soon for new adventures. Thank you for leaving me comments and likes as usual. Goodbye, everyone.